when we're together.
We'll play for you on the way home.
All right. Well, let's see. Oh, 9:03. Close enough. But welcome back. Today is August 24th, a red letter day in history, if ever there was one, because it was on this date. It was on this date in 410 that Rome fell. So the fall of the western capital of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire continued on for another 1,000 years, only it was headquartered in Constantinople, which later became Istanbul, and that's where we were in March. But it was on this date in 410. So in 1349 was the Black Death Massacre. Black Death Massacre, and that was a situation in Mainz, Germany. It was part of the Holy Roman Empire at that time, where 6,000 Jews were accused of, well, the Jewish community was accused of causing the Black Death. And as a result of this, a riot and a mob action, and in the end, 6,000 Jews ended up dying as a result of this. Again, it was in Mainz, M-A-I-N-Z. I think that's how it's pronounced. In 1349. In 1572, today is the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre. I know the days are just getting better and better. In 1572, the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre. This was a day when the French Catholics finally decided to have it out on the Protestants. The Protestants, which would be the Huguenots, had a modicum of freedom in France up until that time. And this was the day when the Catholics said, no, that's about enough. 1741, it was on this date that Isaac Backus was converted. Isaac Backus, a New England preacher, one of the original, I guess you might call him, or founders of the Baptist Church in America. So whereas the Methodist Church can look at John Wesley or Francis Asbury, the Baptist Church can look at Isaac Backus. He was converted on this date in 1741. In 1751, Thomas Colley, a chimney sweep, was executed for murdering an accused witch. He was part of a mob. Again, we're big on the mobs today. Mob action. They accused this woman of a witch, and so he took it upon himself to be part of this, and ended up killing the witch, accused witch, I should say. And then he later was executed for that a few months later. This is just kind of an illustration of how crazy people can get. Even we talk about mob actions, and people get caught up in things, and next thing you know, there's like, oh, whoa, I didn't really mean that to happen. And so, but that was that. 1795, Samuel Stennett died. I know, I'm sad too. Samuel Stennett, minister, hymn writer, wrote most famously one of my favorite hymns, the hymn "On Jordan's Stormy Banks I Stand and Cast a Wistful Eye to Canaan's Fair and Happy Land. I am bound for the promise." That's all together now. I'm kidding. Just kidding. And in 1917, the Ernest Shutloff, a congregational minister, died in Europe while doing ministerial work. He also is a hymn writer, best known for the hymn "Lead On, O King Eternal." I can't remember all the words to that. I can remember the tune to that one, but not the words. That was that. In 1968, I've only got a few dozen more of these today. There's a lot of stuff today. Okay, you should see what I left out. Okay, in 1968, it was the beginning of the Second General Council of the Latin American Episcopate. I know, why don't we celebrate this stuff more? That's what I was thinking. Actually, why this is important is this was the first time where taking place in South America, where Gabriela Gutierrez, I think that's his name, was there introducing the idea of liberation theology. Liberation theology is an approach to Scripture that looks at the Exodus as being the central. That's kind of the easiest way, the easiest oversimplified way to point it. That liberation theology looks at the Exodus as being the central point of the Bible. So whereas if you're an evangelical, like our church, you would look at the incarnation as being the central moment of the Bible. The kind of the whole thing is about the incarnation. If you're hold the idea of liberation theology, you look at the Exodus as being, and the point there is that when you look at the Exodus, you see the rescue, the bringing out kind of thing, and so that the point of the gospel is to bring out, to rescue, people. And so you will find that there are a lot of, especially in fact, most non-white evangelical Christians tend toward a liberation theology view. Okay, especially in South America. I mean, it sounds the same. I mean, we can worship together and all that, but it's just, that's what it is. Not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. It's interesting. The book is really interesting, looking at how his book, a theology, just called The Theology of Liberation, on how the Exodus is the central point. That was in 1968, and of course in 1991, it was on this date, and this is important for Debbie and I. It was on this date that Ukraine announced its independence. So today is Ukrainian Independence Day. So, yay! That's right. So, yay! Something else happened on that day. I can't remember what it was. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm kidding. I remember. This is our anniversary. So happy. We were married on Ukrainian Independence Day. So it was the day. Yes, yes. On this day in 1991, we were married. So yeah, this is our anniversary, and like many of you, we will be going to a church meeting on our anniversary. So, yay! The sad thing, or it's not sad, the interesting thing is this is not the first time we have gone to a church meeting on our anniversary, but ask me later, I'll tell you about that meeting. So, all right. All right, so before we're going to be in 2 Samuel and talking about the return of the king. I really do think about the titles of these sometimes. I try to think of a clever one, but I'm stealing from J.R.R. Tolkien here, but we're going to be talking about the return of the king. All right, one of the things that I really love and getting a kick out of in talking about Samuel is just and again, it wasn't until I really got into it for this that I realized just how interconnected everything is. Okay, and so it's really kind of interesting when you start seeing it, and it's one of the reasons why sometimes I start with so many previouslys. You know, so we're kind of addicted to when you watch something on TV that you have to watch the previously, so that they kind of catch up what was going on. And every time our kids tell us there's some great new sequel out, then we have to go back and watch the previous film to remember what So you have to get married a certain the time, you just forget this stuff, right? Like what happened in that movie? Who was in it? Kind of thing. So that's one of the reasons why we have it. So there's some really interesting things kind of looping back in this. In fact, you might call this settling of scores part one, because there is a settling of scores part two that happens later. But we'll talk about that later. So first of all, previously, not discussed in this class, but previously, Joshua, we all know the story of Joshua, who took over after Moses, entered the promised land by crossing the Jordan River at the city of Gilgal. Okay, so this is, if I'm, now don't tell Paula that I'm writing on her board. Okay, so you have, I don't know exactly this is so Jerusalem is like right about here. I think Gilgal is right about here. So Joshua and the children of Israel come to this point. They go and they if you remember, if you read the story, it takes up 3 chapters, Joshua 3, 4, and 5. They lead the lead the people, the Ark of the Covenant. They touch the ground, and over they come. And so that takes place. And then when they get over, they build this monument. They pick up 12 stones from the middle of the river, and they build this monument there, so that when your children say, what happened here, you can say, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this monument in Gilgal, which is a little bit on the other side of the Jordan River. Now, if you remember, David, of course, after fleeing Jerusalem, had gone across the Jordan River. That was all part of that story where he sent messages because, Hushai and Ahithophel said, get across. So all of the battles with Absalom and all takes place on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Joshua 3, 4, and 5. So that's where Joshua enters. Previously, Absalom spent 4 years at the gate of Jerusalem, where he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. If you remember that, he was saying there, oh, what's your problem? Where are you from? What's your problem? And somebody would say, this is my story. And he would say, oh, that is such a good problem. And you have such a good case. And if only somebody like me were in charge, I could do something about it. But sadly, I'm not. And the question there was like, where is David during all of this kind of stuff? We don't know, right? And one of the reasons David was kind of hoping everything would fix itself. I don't know. But previously, Absalom spent 4 years at the gate of Jerusalem. Previously, when David was leaving, he was met by a guy named Shimei, or maybe Shimei, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, who was cursing David and blaming him for Saul's death and the death of the Saulite kingdom, and throwing rocks at him. And as a result, previously, Abishai, who is Joab's brother, who is David's nephew, wanted to kill Shimei for cursing David. Okay. Now we also know that I didn't put in there's another previously. Maybe it's later on. Previously, Abishai was with David back in 1 Samuel when they snuck into the camp, and they stole Saul's water bottle and his spear. And if you remember the story, Abishai is like, hey, I'm here. There's a spear. Let me kill him. And David says, no, 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 no. You can't kill the Lord's anointed. You just don't do that. Okay. So previously, Ziba, Saul's former steward, provided supplies when David most needed them. If you remember, David was running on the run, and all of a sudden, Ziba shows up with all kinds of food and dates and raisins and stuff and food, and helped him out. And David asks him, he says, "Where's Mephibosheth?" And Ziba says, "Oh, well, Mephibosheth, he thinks that Absalom is going to restore him to the kingdom, his kingdom, kind of thing." So he told Mephibosheth that David had gone over to Absalom. All right, so everybody got the befores, the previouslys. Okay, now this is where the credits roll as the movie starts, kind of thing. Now we're going to come into the actual show. We're in. Let's see. So we last left it was a story of the death of Absalom, and we have David mourning, saying, "Absalom, my son, oh Absalom, would God that I had died for thee, Absalom, my son." And I think that one of the interesting things about that story is that this is David at the bottom. He's perhaps he's broken. He's realized that all of his sins have come to roost here. I mean, I think this is just kind of the moment where he realizes this is all because of me. That he has hit the bottom at this point, and all he wants to do is and rightly kind of just not mope. I'm not trying to minimize the agony he's going through. I mean, he's lost a couple of sons and his kingdom and a lot of other things. But Joab comes in and says, "Listen, dude, if you want to be king, you need to get out there." Okay. Amazingly, Joab, despite all of the trouble, you remember Joab had killed Abner. Despite what David had said, Joab killed Absalom, or at least saw to it that Absalom was killed, despite what David had said. And then now Joab goes in and says, and basically talks to him like no one else does. He says, you need to get out there or you're not going to be king. Okay, there is no, it's really an interesting speech, and we talked about it last week. And so we see in chapter 19, beginning with verse 8. So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. Now, now this is not the gateway of Jerusalem, because they're not there yet, but they're in the gateway of the city, or the location where he is. This is the first time we see David in the gateway since we heard about Absalom in the gateway. Okay, so this is just being out there, being in public, being in a place where the people can't approach him or they can see him. Okay, so again, there's just sort of a thing about being seen, being visible. Okay, that they tell me, one of the important roles of being principal of the school is that you need to be visible. People need to see you. Which I said, how can I do that if I'm hiding in the office all day? That was my goal. But no, you can't do that. Okay, but it's being visible. I'm curious, how many of you have ever seen a current, president of the United States while he was president? Anyone? Yeah, like you're in a crowd or whatever. Just see anyone. I mean, the closest I've seen a current vice president. And I've seen I met Jimmy Carter once, but he was no longer president. And I've been 15 feet away from Abraham Lincoln because that's how far down he's buried. I've been to a few other, but I've never seen an actual living current president. I saw a helicopter that Ronald Reagan was in one time. I believe it. Ronald Reagan was in. I mean, it's Marine Corps One. Like whatever airplane the president is on is Air Force One. So Air Force One is not a plane. We kind of think that, oh, that's Air Force One. No, any plane that the president is on is Air Force One. So if the president were to get onto some experimental two-seater, that would be Air Force One. Just saying. And any helicopter he gets on is Marine Corps One. But he was at Bolingbrook High School. Reagan. It was Ronald Reagan. But whatever. So here we find David sitting in the gateway at the start of our story. Okay, so David is back out in public. He's probably not happy about being there, but at least he's out in public. He's facing his people. And we start our story about the return of the king. Okay, so beginning with verse 9. Throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, the king delivered us from the hands of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? Okay, so interesting. The 10 northern tribes, that would be all but Benjamin and Judah, recognize a problem. Okay, they recognize that David was a great king. Remember David? Remember when David was a king? All these great things were going on, et cetera, et cetera. But there was that whole Absalom thing. And we anointed Absalom as king. Okay, so this is the only indication we have that there was any sort of process that Absalom went through to become king. So, so there was some time, 6 months, a year, I don't know, however long it was to arrange this anointing. Now, it could be a situation where the northern tribes were just kind of jumping in to get on the bandwagon, because that's kind of what you see going on here. People kind of running back to get back on the David bandwagon. But they realized we anointed Absalom king. Okay, so now we don't have a king anymore because the one we anointed the king is dead. So we anointed, and Absalom has died in battle. Maybe that's the story they have. Maybe that's just a little historical revisionism. That's when you say somebody died in battle, you kind of get the idea that he's got the sword and he's running into the breach kind of thing, and you struck down by an enemy soldier in the course of fighting, which is not exactly how Absalom died, as you may recall. Okay. There was a battle going on, so it's close enough. But Absalom has died in battle. And so we need to bring back David, which they apparently start to do. And it's interesting. He says, so why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? So it's kind of confusing here, what's going on. Okay, we know that there's this discussion in in the northern part of the kingdom, the northern 10 tribes, that either maybe nobody wants to talk about it, maybe nobody wants to say, you know what, we might have made a mistake there with that whole Absalom thing. You know, there was probably one or two people that were like really in favor of taking on Absalom, and suddenly they realized, oops, that didn't work out. Now I know it's probably never happened to anyone in the room here, but in the course of my 34 years of being married, I've had a few occasions, just a few dozen, where I have advocated very strongly for something that turned out to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a good idea. Okay. Didn't go as well as I thought it was going to go. Okay. And it's plain that it's not going to go as well as I thought it was going to go. Okay. So there's this Australian singer that I like. And I got a couple of her albums, and I kept telling Debbie, it's like, if we ever go to Australia, it's going to be to see this woman in concert. Well, then lo and behold, she put out a new album, and she came to Chicago, to City Winery. Has anybody ever been to City Winery? So we were going to go to City Winery to watch this this woman perform, and I was looking forward to it because I'm thinking she's like a folk country sort of performer. That's kind of how I pictured her, would have described her before this thing. And so we get up there, and we're eating, and then she came out to do, like, her very first song was just speakered up like you wouldn't believe, and it was this kind of a bluesy screeching that I couldn't understand a word she said, but it was like about 10,000 decibels. Okay. Now there's something that I know about Debbie, and that is that she doesn't like very loud music. And so now I'm sitting there. This is the first song. I got to go through the whole concert, sitting next to her, going, "Okay, this was not a good idea. This was not nearly." Look at her nodding over here, right? This was not as good an idea as I thought it was going to be, kind of thing. So, and I know that's never happened to any, but it's, it's my anniversary, so it's, confession day, right? I can tell these stories, but it's and so maybe that's happened to you, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are very much, hey, like pro Absalom. Now wait a minute, that didn't work out well, so let's not talk about it yet. But there's somebody talking about it. There's somebody in Israel saying, listen, we got to get this whole king thing back, right? We got to make sure this works out, and we need to bring back David, which they apparently start to do. Now, King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. So David, meanwhile, knows that the northern kingdom is talking about him. King David says, ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to bring back the king? It's like, hey, where's you guys? Where's your invitation? You're my tribe. I mean, again, later on we have the prophet is not without honor, saving his own country, sort of thing. It's like, so the northern tribes are calling for me. Where's your invitation? David expects this, and then he says, so why? And so let me make sure I get this. David wants to know why his tribe hasn't called. He also fires Joab. Okay, remember Joab? He's the one that was talking to him. And he says, and say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. Okay, so if you remember, Amasa is also David's nephew, he's the son of another sister, not Zeruiah. He's the son of another sister. He was also Absalom's head of Absalom's army. Okay, so he's still within the family, but he's fired Joab. It's like, hey, I'm just, and just it's interesting. He said, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely. This is sort of the construction of a, of an oath. I swear on my mother's grave, or however you make those kind of oaths nowadays. This is like a Hebrew kind of oath. I swear this is going to happen. Okay, so he's fired Joab. Okay, so Joab is out of the picture, or maybe not. So not quite. We're not done with Joab yet. Okay, Joab isn't going to just roll over. Okay, I mean, Joab never really paid attention to what the king said anyway, so why should he start now? Joab is coming back, so don't worry. So the Joab fans in the room, don't worry, Joab is coming back. Okay, so he also fires Joab and replaces him with Amasa, who had been Absalom's general and is another member of David's family. Okay, again, where's Joab? Well, we'll find out. Okay. Then in verse 14, he says, he won over the hearts of the men of Judah. So maybe this is through his communication. Maybe it's through his being in the gateway. Maybe it's through his visibility. Okay. But again, this is in contrast to, if you remember what was said about Absalom in chapter 15, that Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel, which would have included. Now, David already kind of has the hearts of the people of Israel, but David has won them back. Okay, we realize it. We want David back. Now the men of he won over the hearts of the men of Judah, so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, "Return, you and all your men." Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Okay, so the king is over here, somewhere. He says, "All right, I'm going to go to the Jordan." And where does he go? He goes to Gilgal. So again, in the Old Testament especially, to a certain extent more in the New Testament, place matters. Okay, so David is returning using the same route that Joshua used to enter the kingdom, to get the kingdom that God had promised to the nation of Israel, to the people of Israel. David is returning the same route to get the kingdom that God had promised to him. Okay, and they can't help but know this because they're in Gilgal. And what's in Gilgal? A big monument of stones. Okay, so that people will go, what's that monument of stone? Oh, that's to remind us that this is where Joshua came through, and this is also where David is coming through. So David is, there's this moment where David is saying, listen, just like God gave this land to the people of Israel, I'm coming back to the kingdom that God gave to me. So really, how does this all happen? Because God wanted David back in the kingdom. And he's reminding the people of that kind of thing. So again, place matters. Sometimes, especially when they make a big deal about the place, you have to think why. Why do they make a big deal about that place? So now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Now, so apparently they're making a whole ceremony out of this because again, this is. I think David is really trying to just recreate the whole Joshua crossing into Israel. Okay, and so there's a whole ceremony. So they're coming down to meet him and bring him over the Jordan River. Okay, which depending on what time of year it is, it might be a relatively simple thing. Otherwise, it could be pretty. The Jordan River is a pretty fast moving river, so it's not like you're just walking across a creek kind of thing. So how many of you have ever been in the Jordan River? Anyone? Yeah. So it's a fairly fast moving. It's not deep. It's not super deep, but it's deep enough. They say you can drown in a bathtub. You can drown in 6 inches of water. So it's deep enough to make it really, really super difficult to do this quickly. And so there's a crowd of people coming down. And as this crowd of people comes down, we have a series of meetings. David has a series of meetings with 3 different people at the Jordan River, or either on this side or that side of the Jordan River. Okay, so David wins over the hearts. David and his followers traveled to the Jordan at Gilgal to be brought over, and has 3 meetings with persons from his recent past. And just so we're clear, I've actually, in my cleverness, I've bolded the names of the 3 people so we know where we're starting. So first person he meets is Shimei. Remember Shimei? Cursing David, wishing David on death to him. Okay, and it says in let's see, where was I? Verse 15. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David, because he's got some explaining to do, and he knows it. So I'm guessing Shimei is a fairly well-known landowner, okay, or property owner, or somebody big in the area. And he knows that if the king comes back and he's not reconciled, it's not going to look good for him. Okay? With him were about 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and do whatever he wished. Okay? So they really want to get in good with King David. And why not? Who wouldn't want to? Okay? Then when Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, okay, so now when if I ever teach a session on, forgiveness or asking for forgiveness kind of thing, this is going to be the speech, okay? Start here. I'm not saying it's perfect, but start here. Okay, so because Shimei knows that once David gets on the other side of this, has the power to go, you know what? You out of here. Okay, and he can take his land, take his property, kill him. David has been known to do that kind of stuff. Okay, and he says, so Shimei says, may my Lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my Lord, the king, left Israel. May the king put it out of his mind. Don't even think about that. Just forget. It was just, just forget. But for I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my Lord, the king. So he says, Shimei brings 1,000 from the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Saul. He admits that he did wrong, and tells David that I, your servant, know that I have sinned. Okay, now, David, of course, had a very similar speech back a few chapters where he said, I have sinned. All right. And David was forgiven on a theological level, or, on a spiritual level. By God, he was forgiven, I think. But there were still some serious consequences, as we are kind of dealing with. And here, Shimei is coming through, I have sinned. Okay. So, you get a lot of this in Samuel. Shimei says it, David says it, Saul says it, kind of thing. But we're not done with Shimei yet. Okay. So again, don't just remember, this is going to be, meaning part 2 when we get to what I'm calling the epilogue. Where we talk about, at the end of the movie where they do, here's what happened to all these characters, kind of thing. We're going to do that kind of talk. We're not done with Shimei yet. Okay. For your servant knows that I have sinned, but today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my Lord the king. Right? So he's there. He's prostrate on the ground. Please forgive me. Enter Abishai. I like this guy. I like Abishai. Abishai is willing. He's like, hey, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? Right? Remember, can you imagine? So I wonder if as Shimei goes down, he sees Abishai and going, ooh, this guy's trouble. But I'm talking to this guy, but this guy's trouble. And sure enough, here, because Shimei, like back, when they were going the other direction, Shimei was, let me kill him. Let me just kill him. And David's response to Shimei then, or to Abishai then, was that, why? What's it to you? Maybe God wants Absalom to be king. Maybe I'm being judged. Maybe this is the end. Don't. Now David is the king. So Shimei was clearly wrong. Abishai had grounds then. And again, why couldn't Abishai kill Saul? Well, because you don't just kill the Lord's anointed. You don't do things to the Lord's anointed. There's consequences to doing things to the Lord's anointed. Now, Abishai has got his ducks in a row, right? He's like, okay, look, you wouldn't let me kill him before because there was doubt. Now there's no doubt. You did this. Let me just kill this guy. I think we all need an Abishai in our lives, right? Somebody just let me kill this guy. Okay, just let me kill this guy, kind of thing. And he says, then Abishai says, he cursed the Lord's anointed. Now, David's replies in verse 22. What does this have to do with you? This is similar to what he had said before. What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? Now this is a fascinating response. What he does here, because we're going to go. This is not a. It's going to sound like a rabbit trail, but it's not. This okay. It says, "What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah?" Okay. Now amongst the sons of Zeruiah, there's Abishai and there's Joab. Okay. So I'm thinking David is thinking to myself, haven't you guys done enough? Okay. Haven't you helped enough? Okay. Haven't you like moved the envelope forward enough, kind of thing? And what's fascinating here is he says, "What right do you have to interfere?" Now here's the fun part about this. Now, if you have a different translation, many different translations is say, who made you the adversary? Okay, and the word there, adversary, is the word Satan, which is where we get the name Satan. It's the same word in Job chapter 1. Okay, where Jesus or where God is talking to Satan. Okay, now this is one of the things how we have developed our theology. Is Satan, Lucifer, the fallen, the prince of the power of the air, is that who God is talking to? Well, perhaps. I wasn't there. But the word is an office. The word is a description. Okay, the word is a function. Okay, somebody operates in the kingdom as the Satan. Okay, as the accuser, somebody who were just who the role was simply somebody to I know this is what I'm thinking of, but it's going to be like the devil's advocate, although forget the devil part, kind of thing. It's just somebody to say, you know what, Stan, you ought to marry Debbie, or I'm all right. I announce I'm going to marry Debbie, and yeah, there you go. Meet Satan, right here. Okay, you know. Somebody to say, you know what, you might be too young to get married. And I was, because I'm only 39 now. And so I was 8 and Debbie was 4. No, I'm just, but somebody who would just say, is that a good idea? Is that person really deserving of this? Is that really the best person for that? Okay. This was what the Satan was, the accuser. Okay. Now, as time has gone on and theology has developed, we have kind of just assumed that when you see the word Satan is referring to a specific person, a specific angel, and that might be the case. But I know we're not in Job, but we don't know that, and the text doesn't demand it. Okay, and of course, one of my pet peeves is like, what does the text demand? So the text doesn't demand. It could be, okay, and you got to kind of get the whole, how can God be in the presence of Satan and all of that? Then you have that problem. But and if not, well, then who is this person? I don't know. Okay, or who is this angel? But David is saying to him, who made you Satan? Who made you the Satan in this kind of thing? Who made you the adversary? This is not your position, kind of thing. And so you see, we need to bring back here verse. Abishai interrupts, wanting to kill Shimei again because he cursed the Lord's anointed. So you can see the other passages where Shimei has been. David rebukes him. What right do you have to interfere? That's the NIV. And interfere equals adversary. It equals that's there's actually an accent mark over the S as well. But I can only do so much with my kind of an interesting use of the word there. So then David turns and says to Shimei in verse 23, "You shall not die." And the king promised him on oath. Now later in Chronicles or in Kings, we're told just a little more information that David repeats to Solomon, that I told him that I would not put him to the death. So hold that thought. David promised. So the promise David is making here is that I will not kill you. Okay, that's the promise he's making. Okay, and actually it goes, I will not kill you for this offense. He is forgiven for this offense. Shimei is not going to die for this offense. That's a teaser. That's a teaser trailer to get you to come back for the epilogue to find out. Wait, sounds like something's going to happen to Shimei. Perhaps. Um, David promises not to kill Shimei. Spoiler: we are not done with him yet. Then he meets with Mephibosheth. Now remember, when we last left Mephibosheth, according to Ziba, who told David, he has thrown in his lot with Absalom because he thinks Absalom is going to make him, restore him to his position. Now keep in mind, the king had already restored all of Saul's lands to Mephibosheth. So as far as wealth and possessions, Saul or Mephibosheth already had all of Saul's things. So when David hears that Absalom is going to restore restore Mephibosheth, keeping these names straight is tough. Okay, I should have I'm gonna have to talk to Paul and see if I can't just get like a sheet there. Can you cover Samuel in your class, and then maybe we can just kind of coordinate this so that I don't have to. But when Mephibosheth is going to be restored, he's thinking to the kingdom. Now, if you think about it, that's not really a very likely occurrence. In hindsight, when you really start thinking about it, oh yeah, that's really not, is Absalom really going to say, take over for kingdom, drive David out of the kingdom, and then say, all right, Mephibosheth, you're up, get on the throne? Is that really likely to happen? I don't know. Maybe in your life this has never happened, but in my 34 years, I predicted that I have made a few predictions in my life. Most of them are spectacularly wrong. That this is just not going to. And then I think back and go, yeah, that never was going to happen, kind of thing. That was never going to happen. I don't know why I thought it would, but it is just never going to happen. I'm really good when it comes to elections. Just come up and ask me, who do you think is going to win? And I will give you a very detailed reason, very good, very convincing reason why a certain person is going to win the election. And then my recommendation is bet on the other side. I'm just saying. She's nodding over here, okay? So I'm not saying bet on the other side because I am fantastically wrong in those sort of things. But Mephibosheth arrives. Mephibosheth, in verse 24, Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. Okay, so Mephibosheth arrives unkempt, unkempt, dirty, and looking like someone in mourning. Remember, if you're in mourning, you put sackcloth on and pour ashes over your head, and all that kind of stuff. Unkempt. Okay. Now it's interesting. Remember what we talked about with the as far as narratives. How do you know the truth? How do you know what actually is or is not? And the what you know is what the narrator tells you. There's no question about it. The narrator says. So the narrator says, this is what Mephibosheth looked like when he arrived. Okay. So we know that's true. Okay. Now we know that Ziba said Mephibosheth went over to the other side. But all we know is that that's what that's what Ziba said. We don't know that that's what he actually did. Okay, you see the difference? So again, it's one of those kind of deals that when you're listening to sermons, and if you're making a huge point about something somebody said, you have to kind of go, well, okay, wait a minute, that's just what the person said. You don't know that that's actually true. It could just be, we've got the word of Satan. You could take a weird, there are lies in the Bible. Yeah, we've got Satan saying, hath God said, kind of thing. Is that true? No, but we know that's what Satan said. This is actually Satan, not the accuser Satan. Okay, confuse myself now. I'm really starting to throw names around. All right, so we know Mephibosheth looked this way when he showed up. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him the one question that the king was going to ask. Why didn't you go with me? Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? Where were you? What? Why didn't you go? All I did for you, behind this thing, and behind all of this was going on, I restored you. I gave you a seat at my table. I let you and your family live. Why didn't you go with me? Okay. Mephibosheth replied. Now, this is Mephibosheth's side of the story. Okay, so you have to treat Mephibosheth's side of the story the same way you treat Ziba's side of the story. Okay, the fact that we like Mephibosheth more than we like Ziba, or that we like Ziba more than we like Mephibosheth, is irrelevant. It's like, from a textual and an analytical point of view, it's like they're both, this is his side, this is his side. Okay, and the bottom line is we don't know which one is true. Okay, but you can. Well, let me make my point here, and then I'll. He said, "My lord the king, since I your servant am lame." Okay, we know that because the narrator told us that earlier. I said, "I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king." Okay, so and Mephibosheth knows what Ziba said to the king. Okay, and he's saying that's slander. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? Okay. So Mephibosheth answers, I wanted. So David asks, why didn't you go with me? Mephibosheth answers, I wanted to, but Ziba betrayed me and slandered me. Now that makes sense, because what was Ziba supposed to do? He was supposed to take care of Mephibosheth. Okay, he and his 15 sons and his 20 servants. There's 15 children, 15 sons. I think it's 15 sons. Okay, he was supposed to do this, and so one very good explanation why Mephibosheth wasn't able to go away with David was because the person who was supposed to go away with David wasn't there to help him. Okay, now remember, Ziba didn't go with him either. Ziba does show up at some point, but Ziba's not marching along with David. He shows up, and I think Ziba's kind of trying to keep both ends. Okay, I like Mephibosheth more than I like Ziba. I'll be just gonna give it out there, give away my my leanings here. He says, all my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. Okay. Now, Robert Alter, who's a Hebrew scholar and is one of the books I've got, the David story, translated this, and he makes a point that in the Hebrew, there's an intimation in the way this is pronounced, or the way when Mephibosheth says, all my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death. Okay, is that there's sort of an implication that, and this is possible. This is his speculation. I'm just repeating his. It's possible that Mephibosheth is suggesting a well-known belief that David had something to do with the death of Saul. And perhaps he's saying, you could have killed all of us, but you left me alive. Okay. So now I did not say that David had killed anybody, but the implication there, you could have killed all of us, but you left me alive, is that you killed everyone but me, even though he didn't actually. You see how, again, so it's kind of a very subtle thing. And the reason why this is important is because now if you look at the facts, you think about, okay, now we know that David, on the one hand, David got help from Ziba when he needed it. Okay, so he sort of owes Ziba one. Okay, and we know that Mephibosheth certainly looks like someone who's been in mourning, and Ziba has a really good reason why he didn't go with David. Okay, there's a very good explanation why, and David has talked to and Ziba's kind of trying to, there's a whole survival thing on it. So it's like now David has to make a choice. Who am I going to believe? Am I going to believe Ziba, or am I going to believe David? Or am I going to believe Mephibosheth? Who am I going to believe? So what he does, the king says to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. Just, you take half, let Ziba have half. Okay, so he's splitting it down. Does this story sound familiar? Does it ring a bell somewhere? Maybe you're thinking of the story in 1 Kings chapter 3, where Solomon is presented with two women and a baby. He said, "It's my baby." No, it's my baby. It's my baby. It's my baby. Okay. See, the baby at that story, the baby was sleeping at that moment, because nobody claims nobody claims a crying, shrieking baby, right? It's hers. It's hers. It's hers, and it's a quiet, happy little baby. There. I'm sorry. That was a rabbit trail. Okay. But yeah, it's kind of the same idea. And if you remember that story, Solomon says, "Well, cut the baby in half and give each side a half." And then the real mother says, "No, no, 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 let her have it." And Solomon says, and the fake mother says, "Okay, yeah, I'm good. If I can't have the baby, she can't have the baby." The fake mother says this, and Solomon says, "No, no, no. Give the baby back to this person, because the real mother would rather live without than see harm come to the baby." And so you think about that compared to Mephibosheth's response. Mephibosheth says to the king in verse 30, Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely." Now, to me, this all suggests that Mephibosheth's side of the story is correct. I believe Mephibosheth. I believe Ziba is kind of he's he plays the game. He's kind of a snake, sort of a sneaky kind of guy that's trying to work the system, trying to eat both ends against the middle, kind of things like that. Um, and sadly, he gets half of the property in the end, because again, he did help David in a moment when David needed it. Okay, and that's important to David. Okay, so David's solution, split it. Now, what happened after this point, we don't know, because we don't hear about Ziba again. Okay, we don't hear about Mephibosheth again. Okay, but this was, so David is now. I mean, this is like he's not even back, and he's got to deal with this. This is like, okay, here's your first problem. How are you going to? And actually, David is still honoring his commitment to Jonathan, because Jonathan has, or because Mephibosheth still has half of, at least access to half of what his grandfather owned. So David is still honoring that commitment. Then he meets a guy named Barzillai. Okay, now Barzillai, we haven't met before, but Mephibosheth says in verse 30, "Let him take everything." Then in verse 31, Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rohelim to cross the Jordan with the king and sent him on his way from there. So now Barzillai is up in here. He's coming down to this area. He's going to go over with the king and then come back. That's the plan. He's going to come over with the king and then come back. And he had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, "Come over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you." And one of the reasons he says that is because, on one hand, Barzillai had been very kind to him, had provided for him, and also Barzillai is an old guy. Okay? Barzillai answered the king, "How many more?" Okay, so now Barzillai was very old, verse 32, was very old, 80 years of age. So now we know where old age starts. I'm just saying. It's in the text. It's in the Bible. I'm just saying. I'm just, right there. Okay? So he had provided for the king during his stay, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said, "Come over with me." Barzillai answered the king, "How many more years will I live that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I'm now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voice of female and male singers?" Okay, so again, he's, the eyes are going, the hearing's going, actually this starts happening, word to the wise, this starts happening long before you get to be 80. But I'm, just saying, things start breaking down, But he says, what, I'm not the one. It's not gonna make a difference for me. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Now, we don't know who Kimham is. Everybody kind of thinks this is his son. Okay? Because why else would Barzillai, give this guy up. Okay, say here, take Kimham, because obviously this would be a very parental thing to do. Hey, provide for my son. Okay. The king said, but here's your servant. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever you wish, and anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home, and his Kimham went with him. So it says, Barzillai travels 50 miles to see the king over, despite being 80. He provided for David during David's exile. David wants Barzillai to join him, but he says no, sending his son instead. And then later, and this one I'm going to give away, one of the charges that Solomon is given from David is to honor this family. Okay, honor this family, because they did well for me. Honor this family through your life. Okay. When the king crossed over, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Okay, so all the troops of Judah and half of Israel. Half of Israel. Okay, it's like David crosses over with all the troops of Judah and half of Israel. This is kind of interesting. I didn't. Maybe they had the number. They knew. Maybe they knew certain tribes were missing. I'm not exactly sure how they knew it was only half. But this exposes a little bit of a rift. Okay, when the king crossed over, all the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Now, the last 4 verses or 5 or 6 verses in this chapter are just this back and forth between Israel and Judah. Just kind of this, Israel said, soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? Because you remember the Israelites were first, right? They were first off to say, hey, we need to bring back the king. And then the king lets the people of Judah help him over. And they're like, hey, wait a minute, man, we're your bigger fans. Okay. So, I kind of wonder if David is sitting there thinking, maybe Absalom should have been left as the king. Maybe it would have been easier in the long run if I would have just given all of this up. But, this is the kind of stuff that, so you've got, they're mad. Now the people of Israel are mad because the people of Judah had got first in there when they had announced first. And wait a minute, I said first. And again, if you have more than one child, this discussion. You've had this discussion. Why does he get this? Why does she get that? Why do I get that? Why can't I do what that's one can do? I cannot imagine what you do with 3 kids. Triangulate, I don't know what. I mean, play a zone defense, something. I don't know what you do there. But all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel. We did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves? We were just doing our duty. We didn't take anything. You didn't lose anything by this. Okay, this is one of those arguments. Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah. We have 10 shares in the king. We have a greater claim on David than you have. Why then do you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back the king? And they were. And then in the last verse of the chapter, but the men of Judah pressed their claim even more forcibly than the men of Israel. Now, I don't know if there's a claim or if it's just bragging rights that we're talking about. But it's like, why is this story in here? Why do we have this little snit going on back and forth? Yeah. We should have been first. No, we were first. We should have been first. No, we were. Why is this? Well, so it's like the men of Israel are insulted by this. The men of Judah are insulted that the men of Israel are insulted. The back and forth suggests 2 things. One, there was always a bit of a rift between Judah and the northern tribes. Now, if you remember, when Saul when Saul first died, the men of Israel took Ishbosheth, Saul's son, and the men of Judah called David to be king. So there was that rift beforehand. That lasted for, depending on how you look at it, anywhere from 6 months to 6 years. Okay, and then the men of Israel said, "Oh, you know what? Ishbosheth is dead. Let's make David the king." There was always a bit of a rift between Judah and the rest of Israel. This rift was there between, when David was king, and there would someday be a major rift between Judah and the rest of Israel. Okay, it's kind of foreshadowing that someday there's going to be a bigger rift. All right, we're not done with the people who are going to rebel against David. We'll talk about Sheba next time. Now, next week is Labor Day, so there's no ABF Grow Group. It's a Grow Group, not an ABF. Next week, we will be back. We'll be talking about the Sheba's revolt. Any questions? I mean, you can ask during the thing, but nobody did. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. We'll see you all. Well, I'll see some of you this afternoon. I'll see some of you in the service to come. Some of you next week. So, all right. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, because school is this week. Yeah, we need to.